On Primetime Politics tonight, new census numbers reveal the aging of Canada, stoking concerns about health care and the future of the labour force. This seniors advocate joins me to discuss the numbers and what they mean. And the federal labour minister, Seamus O'Regan, weighs in on the census numbers and his proposals to tackle labour shortages. And more questions about whether key documents will be turned over in the search for answers on why the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act. MPs will be here to debate that as another major protest is set to descend on the Capitol. Let's start with the latest census numbers. They're out today with a focus on Canada's changing demographics and aging population. Here are some of the key highlights. The number of people 85 and older has doubled over the past 20 years, and seniors 65 and older now make up nearly 1/5 of Canada's population. Statistics Canada says the number of people nearing retirement age has never been so high, and that is fueling labour shortages across Canada. The senior population is growing at a rate 6 times faster than children under 15. But for the first time in 50 years, baby boomers make up less than a quarter of Canada's total population. Immigration has made millennials, those born between 1981 and 1996, Canada's fastest growing generation over the past 5 years. This census is also including data on gender diversity. For the first time, just over 100,000 people aged 15 and older reported themselves as transgender or non-binary. Well, in a few minutes, I'll speak with a seniors advocate about the census numbers today. The recent federal budget acknowledges the challenges of an aging population and the shortages of labour all of that is causing. The motion supporting the budget, by the way, was passed by the House today. No surprise, given the deal between the Liberals and the NDP. The budget includes a labour mobility deduction, which would provide a tax break of up to $4,000 a year for travel and relocation expenses for skilled trades workers who move across the country to fill some of those labour shortages. But questions remain about what will be done to support workers, especially in the energy sector, as Canada transitions from fossil fuels. Seamus O'Regan is Canada's Minister of Labour, and Sean Strickland is the Executive Director of Canada's Building Trade Unions, representing 600,000 workers in the construction trades across Canada. Gentlemen, good to see you both. Thanks for taking time to speak with me today. I think our viewers can tell we've caught up with you apart, but in the same room at the conference today. So thanks for making time to speak with me. Minister O'Regan, look, just before we get into some detailed building labour shortage stuff, I want to get our conversation on the construction trades, as I say in a moment. But more broadly, the census figures released today reveal Canada's aging population and the problems that's causing with labour shortages across the country. So more than 1 in 5 Canadians of working age, close to retirement now, an all-time high. It'll have a major ripple effect on the country's economy and labour market. What's your government doing to deal with that train coming down the tracks?
So we've been working a lot with myself and my colleague Carla Qualtrough have been working a lot with unions to determine, how do we attract more people in. So I guess the medium long-term play, Peter, will be how do you attract more people into the trades. I'm old enough that I remember we were introduced to them in high school. The opportunity to do metalworking and wood shop, just at least to get a glimmer into it. Now I've gone to some terrific places like the Nova Scotia Trades as a fantastic facility where, as part of the curriculum, kids are able to get through in junior high and high school, and they've got it set up so it's 2 stories high, and it's almost like speed dating. You're speed dating, although with trades, and they at least get an introduction over the course of every student over the course of a few minutes, and they have a mobile unit as well that's able to actually visit high schools around Nova Scotia. So they're tackling it head on. That's the provincial government, federal government, and unions working together to make that happen. That's the medium long-term play. In the short term, how do you make sure that you're not punishing people for going to where the work is? So Sean and I, from the get-go, actually from the moment I think I was sworn in, started working on the labor mobility tax deduction.
Right.
And that's up to $4,000 that can go towards those workers, as they travel across the country, as many Newfoundlanders do, to the work. So you got short term, you got medium term, you got long term. But we do have a significant demographic issue in this country on skilled trades.
Just for the record, I benefited from exposures to the trades in high school as well. So we're from that same era.
Exactly.
Mr. Strickland, for years, Minister touched on it. Construction workers have been complaining about the inability to deduct their travel expenses as they move from job to job where they're needed. How big of a difference will this tax deduction of up to $4,000 a year announced in the budget make in terms of these major infrastructure projects and getting those completed, the government's commitment to housing? How significant is this?
Well, this is a major policy development for Canada's building trades unions. And when you talk about labor availability and skilled trade shortages, it's a very complex issue and complex problem. Requires all kinds of different public sector and government interventions and also private sector interventions. And for almost 40 years, our industry has been saying that we're not treated fairly as construction workers in Canada compared to other professionals under the Income Tax Act. And it creates a barrier for workers to travel where the work is. So oftentimes you would have situations where you have a high area of unemployment, and then you have another area where there's a shortage of workers within a province or across provinces. But it was very difficult to encourage that worker to make that travel as a construction worker because they would have to eat their own expenses. And oftentimes, if they were desperate enough and they're running out of employment insurance, they would do that work. They would have to bunk in deplorable conditions.
But is that
for other people? And it created a real barrier for workers to go to where the work is. And so one of the solutions to help with labor shortages is to improve labor mobility.
Right.
And so this would be a tremendous incentive for workers right across Canada to go to where the work is. And we're really thankful to the government and Minister O'Regan for making sure this was included in Budget 2022.
Minister O'Regan, the tax will the tax deduction will certainly help with mobility issues, but the broader shortage of skilled trade workers, how will the tax deduction solve that? Is the solution to have workers move across Canada for the future, or is it to try and encourage more people to go into the trades?
I would say on the labor mobility tax front, it's something that Newfoundlanders I would argue had a pivotal role in building the oil industry in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and they did that with great entrepreneurial spirit and daring do, flying across the country. Anybody who's ever flown, by the way, between St. John's and Toronto knows it's the plane is jam-packed with workers on almost any given day, heading either to Toronto for the construction industry and for other areas thereafter, or right on to Fort McMurray or Edmonton, Calgary, Regina, Saskatchewan, Vancouver, throughout the country in order to provide labor and in order to have good jobs, jobs that they are extremely good at. But I think you're right to point out that's short term. I mean, longer term, look, we've spent $84.2 million, or that's what we will spend over the next 4 years in the new budget too, where we're double funding the union training and innovation program. So that's gonna hit. This is a program, a well-established program that we have. We're just and we know it works, so we're putting out more money through it. To build up the ability of unions themselves and the provinces to increase the number of people with skilled trades. But the unions do an extremely good job of it. And one of the pleasures of my role, Peter, in my short tenure so far as labor minister, visiting a lot of these training centers throughout the country, and they were really impressive.
Mr. Strickland, what about the transition for workers in skilled trades, in particular in the energy sector? There's been promise of a so-called just transition plan, and I know the labor minister doesn't like the term, and maybe you don't either, but are you satisfied that the federal government has a plan to help workers transition to the jobs of a new, greener economy?
Well, I certainly think we're getting there, and the government is doing all of the right things to make sure that happens. And I was around during the recession of the 80s and 90s, and particularly in Ontario, where we went through a period of deindustrialization and we lost a lot of jobs, and that was not particularly handled very well. And I think that government and members of the department from ESTC and government bureaucrats and the government itself understands we need to do better. The Royal Bank, or the TD Bank, actually issued a report several months ago that indicate in the transition to net zero by 2050, oil and gas sector, we could lose up to 450,000 jobs. And those jobs, a lot of those jobs are building trades,
Right.
construction workers, good middle class paying jobs. And so, how do you manage that loss of jobs as you go through a just transition? You match that up with the Royal Bank report that came out just a little while after that TD report that says, for just transition to invest in the new energy sources of the future, we're going to need to spend $2 trillion in terms of the private sector. So our job and the government's job is that as we transition out of oil and gas, we begin to lose those jobs in oil and gas, we make sure that the new energy sources of the future, hydrogen, small modular reactors, carbon sequestration, wind and solar, all of these different components to create a sustainable energy supply for a modern economy are put into place and keep people working.
All right.
So I differ with the minister a little bit. I don't mind the term just transition. That's been in the labor movement for quite some time. And it really is about, providing justice to workers who, through no fault of their own, may be dislocated and lose a job.
All right, let me bring...
Call it something else, whatever you like, but the point is to make sure that no worker gets left behind, and the government are doing the right things to make sure that happens.
Let me hear Minister O'Regan, just in the 30 seconds or so we have left, Minister. You don't like the term just transition, but will the government spell out a plan to support workers and communities and those jobs that will be disappearing?
Yeah, but I think the important thing is this is not something that's going to happen overnight, Peter. And, I'm not going to succumb, frankly, to, the notion that this is something that is happening and will happen. We'll get that done now by this time next year. This transition is going to be occurring over the next few decades. But the urgent thing that we got to do right now is get emissions down. We got to meet our targets. And we need workers to do that. We are in the middle of a labor shortage. So, trust me when I tell you, right now, one of the biggest things I can do, one of the reasons for my speech here today, was to keep workers, the workers that we have in this business, in this industry, in the oil and gas industry, in the energy industry largely, because we need them. Okay. They're the only ones who know how to lower the emissions and build up the renewables. I don't know how to do it. Most people don't know how to do it. We need workers to do it. I need to retain them in the industry. I got to make sure that we have more workers in this industry. We have a huge job ahead of us, but I'm excited. These are the ones to do it. All
right, we'll leave it at that for today. Seamus O'Regan, Sean Strickland, good of you both to take the time to speak with me today. I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
Now let's pay a little closer attention to the census findings today dealing with aging Canada. Canada's working population older than it's ever been. Seniors are one of the fastest growing segments of the population, presenting some serious challenges for policymakers. Laura Tamblyn Watts is the founder and CEO of CanAge, a national seniors advocacy organization. She's with me now. Laura Tamblyn Watts, good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to speak with me. Look, the latest census data shows seniors over 85 among the fastest growing group in the country. The numbers show we have an aging society. By 2050, the 85 and older population could reach more than 2.7 million people. What do you see in these numbers?
We see a confirmation that Canada is aging very rapidly, in fact, faster than even we had expected. The numbers to take away are 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 people right now are already over the age of 65. And it's important to note that we have more people who are getting ready to retire between 55 and 64 than we have the whole of the group entering into the workforce between 15 and 24. So this is a massive demographic shift. And it's only going to get more profound.
What do these numbers mean, do you think, for healthcare and elder care systems in this country? What's the message here?
We need a plan. We have been absolutely refusing in this country to create a national senior strategy. And so that means that we don't have any overarching plan as other countries do. And what that means is for people who are trying to make decisions about where money should go or how we should create systems, they don't really have aging in mind. This is particularly true when we're thinking about the really strong impact of aging in rural communities where the average ages are well into senior years. And we know that we've been relying on them to come into urban centers to get things like healthcare. And that's just not going to be possible in future. So we're going to really need to make sure that we are thinking about aging when we're designing systems. And that's something we haven't done.
You touched on it. I want to hear more. You talked about what other countries are doing. There's lots of discussion today about how Canada's left this too late, that we're behind the 8 ball, well back on the curve compared to other developed countries. What can you tell me about that?
We have steadfastly refused to look at aging for no good reason, frankly, but ageism. And because governments often look for short-term solutions, and this is a demographic shift that's been going for a long time. If we think about the other OECD countries, we're aging about the same as them. We're a little bit younger than, say, Japan or Germany, which are super aging populations, but they have been thinking about this for a long time. They've been putting transportation mechanisms in place so people can get around more easily if they're not driving. They've been creating mobile units to help people get home care, and they've been able to bring services to people. It also means they've been thinking about the labor force much more than we have. We're really going to be short on people both taking care for seniors, but also just short of people to work generally.
Let's dig into that a little bit. This added challenge of having an aging population that needs more and different kinds of care, but most of those people are out of the workforce, and so not paying for the change that's needed, and population growth is so slow. How do we deal with the budget challenge of paying to support that aging population?
We really need to keep people in the workforce longer as much as possible. Then they're not only filling the jobs, but they're also paying into the coffers of government. And so that idea that we've had, very ageist idea that we need people to leave the workforce so young people can come in, we have to bust that notion open. That means more flexible jobs. That means that we need to be aware of things like caregiving leave and more remote work. Some of these things we've actually solved or taken big steps forwards during the pandemic. So I think we can have a more flexible workforce, and that will help. But if we're not investing smartly, we'll be throwing good money after bad government-wise, and I fear that's where we are right now.
Okay. In your view, talk about investing. We just had the federal budget. Does the federal budget, in your view, capture the urgency of this challenge in front of us?
Not at all. In fact, we were surprised to see how little there has been for seniors. What the federal government needs to do is take the mega trend of aging and do the same thing it's done with the climate change emergency or gender-based issues, which is to make sure that they are requiring all the ministries to focus on this as a priority and to report upon it. By contrast, we have a minister for seniors who is trying hard but really has no staff or no budget. And really nobody else in the government is taking this seriously. It seems, if you look at the dollars, you're not going to find them for seniors issues.
30 seconds or so left. The Ontario budget tomorrow. Let's talk about the provincial level. What do you hope to see by way of perhaps new supports for seniors in that province that saw such a loss during the pandemic of seniors in that province, and how hard Ontario was hit? What are you looking for?
We're seeing that the platforms of the NDP and the Liberals have already dropped, both of which have lots in there for seniors care. The Liberals dropped their platform yesterday and saw $2 billion for home care, and they're promising a reinvention of seniors care. The Ford government has been much more conservative on that and really hasn't taken it as seriously. We'll see what their budget is tomorrow. I think we'll see some short-term promises, but not long-term action.
All right, Laura Tamblyn Watts, thanks for your perspective again tonight, and take care. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
More questions in the House of Commons today on the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act to quell those blockades and protests against COVID-19 restrictions back in February. Public inquiry has been called into the use of the Act, and critics are concerned the government will lean on cabinet confidentiality to hold back key documents from the inquiry. And all of this happening is another big protest. Motorcyclists this time, with a variety of grievances, headed for the nation's capital this weekend. Let's bring in three MPs now to discuss the government's use of the Emergencies Act and the search for answers around that. Liberal MP Yasir Naqvi is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Emergency Preparedness and a member of the special committee looking into this whole affair. Conservative MP Glen Motz is the Vice Chair of that special committee, and Randall Garrison is the Justice Critic for the NDP. It's good to see you all, gentlemen. Mr. Naqvi, Let me start with you. How can you guarantee that Canadians will get a full picture of why the government invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time ever if the government refuses to turn over all of the documents that led to the decision?
Well, Peter, as Canadians know, that the invocation of the Emergencies Act took place in a very unprecedented time for all of us. The kind of illegal occupation that we saw in Ottawa, in my home community, for 24 days, the illegal blockades across the country that disrupted trade between Canada and the United States, all that was really concerning. And government invoked the Emergencies Act to put to the end of it, and revoked the order as well in a very short period of time once the emergency was over. But the government has been very clear that it will be transparent to Canadians as required by the law, and as a result, we've got two very important processes that are ongoing. One, a special joint committee, which Mr. Motz and I are part of, right, that is looking into the exercise of the Act and the functions and the powers that were given under the Act. And most recently, a few days ago, the government also announced an independent public inquiry that is being led
but that's
by
what I'm asking.
Will
Justice Rouleau get to see all the documents he wants to see, even if that involves waiving cabinet confidence?
Well, we cannot presuppose as to the kind of documents Justice Rouleau will need. He's, of course, setting up the commission, and he will work very closely with the government to see what kind of witnesses he wants to hear, what kind of documents he needs, so that he can do his work under the legislation. Mr.
Motz, cabinet confidence is a well-established convention to protect the sensitive discussions that lead to cabinet decisions and the need to protect national security in some cases. It's a protection rarely waived. So why do you believe cabinet confidence should be waived in this case?
Because Canadians expect it, Peter. Canadians expect this government to be accountable and, excuse me, and transparent to them for the invocation of this unprecedented use of the Emergencies Act. You know, even the Prime Minister today talked about how, excuse me, I apologize, talked about how transparent they intend to be, and yet even last night at the committee meeting, both the Public Safety Minister and the Minister of Justice were hiding behind cabinet conferences and lawyer-client privilege, and so that doesn't reveal anything to Canadians, and it certainly doesn't, increase the trust that Canadians have. At a time when Canadians distrust this government, and they have many reasons to distrust this government. Hiding behind these things, it doesn't help. And the fact is, the committee, which Mr. Naqvi and I are privileged to and responsible to get to the bottom of, have taken an oath of secrecy on the matters that might be of sensitive nature. The majority of them will not be. And Canadians deserve to know the truth about what actually caused the invocation in the first place.
Let me move to Mr. Garrison. Mr. Garrison, what's your party's position on cabinet confidence and whether it should apply in this case?
Well, I've got complete confidence in the members of the committee, Mr. Naqvi, Mr. Motz, and certainly Matthew Green from our caucus. They've all taken an oath of confidentiality, so there's absolutely no reason why they don't have all the information put in front of them so we can see how and why the decision was made.
How do you think the inquiry could be hindered or hampered if the government turns to cabinet confidence? What is it you think Canadians wouldn't be hearing?
Well, I think the important part here is that Canadians have to have confidence in the Emergencies Act and the way it is implemented, and they have to know that it was done for a good reason, and they have to know that in the future it will be only used for a good reason. So if you hold back the information at this point, it undermines confidence in the whole system. So that's why we're calling for the release of all the documents, both to the judicial inquiry and to the special committee. We're not saying make them all public tomorrow. We're saying let the people who are doing these inquiries have all the information they need to do their work.
Okay, Mr. Naqvi, the order in council for the inquiry, essentially the terms of reference for Justice Rouleau, focus a lot on the actions of the protesters and the organizers, funding sources, social media disinformation. How do you respond to those who say the government has taken a process built into the law to test whether its invocation of the Emergencies Act met the legal requirement that there was a threat to the sovereignty and security of the country that could not be dealt with under existing laws, and instead has turned that into an inquiry into actions of protesters?
Well, I would encourage all Canadians to look at both the Emergencies Act itself and also the order in council, which outlines the terms of reference. The Emergencies Act very clearly says that the purpose of the inquiry is to look at the circumstances leading to the invocation of this unprecedented legislation. So one has to, under the law, look at what happened that resulted in, for the government, to invoke the use of Emergencies Act. And if you look in the Order in Council, you not only see, Peter, that the government has outlined various elements in terms of the convoy, the funding sources, issues around misinformation and disinformation to be looked at because they speak to circumstances leading to the invocation, but also clearly outlines Justice Ugolo to look at the measures that the government introduced through regulations and order when they invoke the emergency. So he's got fairly wide latitude.
Time is short.
Both those things.
Time is short here. Let me move to Mr. Motz. What's your view on that? Doesn't an investigation of the use of the Emergencies Act necessarily, Mr. Motz, have to look at what the government was facing when it made the decision?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the issue that really has to boil down to is Justice Rouleau in the inquiry and this special joint committee is responsible to look at the actions of government and to hold government to account. That's the issue here. It's not the actions of citizens of Canada that are is part of the inquiry or our special committee. It's the actions of government. And so to do that appropriately, Section 62 and 63 of the Act are very, very clear, and the government has gone above that to put some extra parameters around the justice to try and, in my opinion, take away from the responsibilities that and the accountabilities that they have as a government and focus them somewhere else. And that to me isn't transparent or being accountable.
Mr. Garrison, what's your view on whether the terms of reference for Justice Rouleau are focused on the right things?
Well, I guess my confidence lies with Justice Rouleau, and I don't think he would have taken on this commission to do the inquiry if he thought the scope of his inquiry was unduly fettered. He may, in fact, though, have presumed he'll have access to all the documents, and that's what we're concerned about, is making sure that he has access to what he needs to do his job.
Okay, just to wrap up here, look, there's hopefully, maybe we're not going to be facing deja vu again here, but Mr. Naqvi, there's a big protest heading for the nation's capital again this weekend. Various groups arriving on motorcycles, but they've been told police will block access to Parliament Hill and enforce all bylaws. Do you support the approach to prohibit the protesters from getting their motorcycles anywhere close to Parliament Hill?
Well, law enforcement, as we know, is a matter of a police's jurisdiction. Of course, they have learned lessons, I hope, from the illegal occupation we see. In our democracy, we support peaceful protests as long as they're peaceful. Again, as somebody who represents the downtown community here in Ottawa, I do not want to see the kind of harassment and the harm that our residents and businesses faced in the last occupation, and hopefully this will be a peaceful protest.
Should the threat of that be enough to prohibit people from even getting access even before anything has happened?
No, I think people are free to protest, and I think police will allow to the extent that it's a peaceful protest.
Mr. Motz, what are your thoughts on that, quickly?
The Canadian Constitution and Charter allows us to peacefully protest, and the Canadians certainly have the right to do that in Ottawa's capital.
Should they be allowed on Parliament Hill with their motorcycles?
Of course they should. Well, the whole issue, there is laws in Canada, and this is the whole issue about the whole Emergencies Act. The laws in Canada were there and existed, and they were not required for the Emergencies Act to be invoked in the first place. And so if law enforcement wishes to manage any protest on Parliament Hill, the current laws in this country allow them to do so, and could have been used before, and it certainly can be used in this circumstance. But people are allowed to peacefully protest.
Mr. Garrison, a quick final answer from you.
Well, I guess it comes down to this for me. There's a right to protest, but there's not a right to disrupt the lives of other citizens in Ottawa in order to try and coerce certain actions out of the government. So obviously, New Democrats are very strongly in favor of the right to protest. But that's not what's been going on with the previous occupation, and that's not what's being threatened with the current motorcycle occupation.
All right. Thank you all for your time tonight, gentlemen, and I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all for another edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. I'm Peter Van Dusen from all of us here at the Cable Public Affairs channel, CPAC. Thanks for watching. Till next time.